I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian, and welcome to the Sidebar, a weekly show on the community, arts, culture, and more. Today we're very pleased to be talking with John Zeanah, Chief of Development and Infrastructure for the City of Memphis and an author, so stay with us for a conversation with John. John Zeanah, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Eric.
On video, we're easing our way into video, so we don't know how much of this video will actually make it to the internet, but thank you for your patience. It only took us a minute to kind of get started on the video stuff. So.
Super quick.
Yeah. So we'll touch on some stuff, but this isn't, as we were joking before we started, this isn't behind the headlines. We're not going to grill you on potholes and the state of 240 and 40, which I'm very happy about because they're finally paving the I-40 North, and I give you full credit for that. But we'll talk about like planning and your life in this, and then this book. You have a book that's coming out as we record this. It comes out in a couple days.
That's right. Yeah. So the book is Today's Comprehensive Plan, an Adaptive Approach. As you know, just from the last several years of talking about different things that I've worked on as a part of my time with the city and before that, the city and county through planning and development. One of the big initiatives that I helped lead several years ago was the development of Memphis 3.0, our city's comprehensive plan. When we started that in 2016, the planning and development didn't have a comprehensive planning office. I don't know if people remember that.
Yeah.
That it had been dissolved after the recession. So we were putting that office back in place, bringing on brand new people, and obviously trying to do something that our city hadn't done since 1981, which is to put together a comprehensive plan. There were several of us in the office, and then a lot of folks in the community who were interested in working on it. And so as kind of the leader of that, I went around my bookshelf and the sort of larger shelf of literature around comprehensive planning knowledge, and I read as much as I could, and everything that we experienced on the ground was not reflected.
Wasn't in those books.
and how to. So what I wrote was essentially the book that I wish that I could have read when I got started.
So is it a book? It's not for the general public, I assume, or is it? Who are the audiences?
Yeah, I'd say the main audience is going to be planners, local officials, planning students. There's the first half of the book is really heavy on planning history and theory. The second half of the book is very practical in terms of how to approach a comprehensive plan differently, based on a variety of different things, just sort of flowing from what I talk about in the first part of the book. So it's primarily for planners. It's primarily for planning students, people who are working in comprehensive planning.
But you say that it's interesting because you kind of know, but I don't know the degree to which you know that I'm sort of obsessed with all kinds of planning stuff. I mean, we met when you were working on Greenprint.
That's right.
I was part of. This was the old Daily News. I was doing behind the headlines, I think, but we were part of Chairman's Circle then, and which was supportive of the whole Greenprint thing, which was the notion of connecting all the paths and bike. And there was a move at that time. The Green Line had happened, and people were like, "That's successful." And this was the layman's purpose, which is layman's experience of Greenprint was all these different ad hoc things are happening with green spaces. It's very cool. Let's link them together.
Right.
But then when you got in the meetings, and like I was in meetings with you, and you're presenting that to whatever politicians and business leaders, it's much more complicated in the considerations and the public input and the wariness and the cost and the benefits and all that stuff that seemed to me kind of self-evident. You want to link all this stuff together because, but it wasn't like that, right? And then Memphis 3.0 was that.
It was very
bigger, right? Because
right.
it was more. It wasn't just green spaces that most people could agree on. It was also land use, zoning, the affordability, like all these super complicated areas that and we're not going to do in the politics. But it has caused, there's more disagreement about that, and still, even since it was adopted.
So that's what you're hitting on is exactly a lot of the themes that I talk about in the book, primarily around. How the traditional planning model is inadequate for a lot of the dynamics that planners are going to face when they're working in communities that are, they're contested. There's established, entrenched constituencies. You're working in developed areas. A lot of the traditional planning model was created for, the methodology was created for establishing new places, new cities.
That makes total sense. Keep going. Yes.
Yeah, and so a lot of the methodology doesn't take into account the dynamics of existing places, existing communities, politics, and so the argument that I'm making in the book is that there has to be more of an adaptive approach in the overall methodology to comprehensive planning in order to take account for what planners do encounter on the ground, whether it's the politics, the community conflict of ideas, and just generally the messiness of cities that you encounter when you're working in a place like Memphis. That it's just not as clean as planning for
the suburbs of Phoenix in the 50s. We've got millions of acres. A lot of people want to be there. Blank slate. It's flat.
Yep, exactly. So one of the things that I touch on in the book is one of the first. So in the 1920s, a lot of what is now modern planning and zoning was being cultivated and established in practice throughout the U.S. And there are a series of sort of thinkers and writers and planners who came together and put together a lot of the foundations for not only the laws that we have today around planning and zoning, but the methods themselves. And so one of the early books is a book called The Master Plan on comprehensive planning. The author of that book wrote it to an audience of a pioneer community. He kept writing to our pioneer community, very clearly stating that the intent of this method is to create a new place, not to work in the cities that very much existed in the 1920s and had a lot of the same dynamics today.
Well, it brings up so many things. Like I'm obsessed with this movie. I think this was part what caused me to articulate some thoughts about planning and urban sprawl and redevelopment, which is and I recommend it to everyone, is the Rick Burns, the brother of Ken Burns. He did what turned into maybe a 9-part series in New York. Have you ever watched it? It's New York. Yeah. And a lot of it, fundamentally, it's about the people, the history, the politics, and it's a kind of metaphor for all of America. It's not just about New York, really, because they're just it's concentrated issues that are happening in New York because New York is New York. But everything they talk about, poverty, they talk about race, they talk about, a lot of it is about planning and bad planning and good planning. And one of the things that's fascinating to me is when cities, and Memphis has gone through it, but all American cities, I grew up in the Northwest, go through these cycles of there's things have been built and then they get torn down, and then there's historic preservation, and there's like this back and forth, back to planning is not about a blank slate in the desert, right? It's about existing neighborhoods, entrenched interests, histories of distrust, justifiable and totally understandable histories of distrust, particularly in poor communities, particularly in Black and brown communities, but not exclusively, right? Like, it's the history of we'll just build all this stuff, and water, there's plenty of water, right? Or the roads, they can just be 4 lanes, they can be 5 lanes, they can be 6 lanes, right? And then you end up with Atlanta, and you end up with Seattle now and LA and so on. So that cycle that it's not a blank slate is so fascinating to me. I mean, and that movie, that documentary, a lot of it captures all the mistakes they make, and then how they go back, and then they start tearing down these beautiful things, and then they start protecting them and so on.
Well, and just to use the example of New York, I mean that was precisely the friction between Jane Jacobs, who wrote The Death and Life of Great American Cities, and she talks about the mistakes of planners treating living, breathing places as if they are a blank canvas, and then she's primarily talking about a figure like Robert Moses, who was the most powerful person in New York City, in New York State for decades, who treated New York City as if it was a blank canvas and saw nothing in
Yeah.
taking down communities and parks and community centers.
He turned neighborhoods into blank slates.
He turned neighborhoods into blank slates.
He tried to turn.
That's right.
The one that will blow people's mind is that they tried to wipe out the West Village and the East Village.
Yeah.
Just mow it down.
Yes.
And put a superhighway through the bottom of Manhattan.
Right.
And you just, it's, and they did it in other neighborhoods.
And he did it in so many other neighborhoods. He just got stopped there.
Yeah. That was it. And it's and then you say, well, that's a movie about New York. Well, the exact same thing happened in Memphis when they stopped the highway from going through the park.
Yeah.
I
do want to sort of give modern or at least contemporary planning a
Yeah.
little bit of credit. There's not a lot of my contemporaries in other cities who are aspiring to be Robert Moses.
Sure, of course.
That viewpoint has certainly changed a lot within planning practice. I think where the methods have to keep up, and that's really what the book is about, is sort of shifting the way we approach comprehensive planning to be more in tune to the living, breathing nature of the cities that we're working with, recognizing the dynamics of not just how a plan fits into a living, breathing place, but maybe just as important or even more important, how a comprehensive plan gets implemented in a place like that. Because sort of, we're talking about a lot of the flaws in terms of the thought process of older planners, or the thought process of older planning methodology. I think one other flaw that's really important to note is how unsuccessful a lot of plans have been at getting implemented. You hear it a lot that a community goes through a lengthy exercise, engages a lot of the community, spends a lot of money to create a plan, and then it ends up on a shelf. It results in nothing. And so there's an adaptability to the way that we're planning that helps to orient the plan better to implementation, which is a big part of what I talk about in the book too.
We're here with John Zeanah. He is Chief of Development and Infrastructure for the City of Memphis. Wrote a book that's coming out, will be available soon, Today's Comprehensive Plan, an Adaptive Approach. And we'll talk more with John here, but let me do some quick housekeeping and remind everyone this is The Sidebar. I'm Eric Barnes. The Sidebar airs on WYXR 91.7 every Thursday at 11:30. Focus on the community, arts, culture, everything in between. It is not just a radio show, though, obviously. It's one of many podcasts we do at the Daily Memphian, including our morning podcast, the AMDM, with Mary Casciola and a whole lot of the staff of the Daily Memphian, including Natalie Van Gundy, who produces all our podcasts, and then other reporters talking about the biggest stories of the day or the week. We also have our food podcast, Soundbites, hosted by Holly Whitfield. And we have our Memphis Grizzlies podcast, hosted by Drew Hill and Chris Harrington. All of those are available wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. And I joked at the beginning, we are easing our way into video podcasts. You can start getting clips of this one on probably, where would it be? It would be on Instagram, and actually getting back on TikTok. Think about that, John. You and I are going to have to dance at the end of this. I don't think I told you that we have to do a little dance that goes on TikTok.
That was not stated previously.
Right. We're not dancing.
That's good.
The old David Letterman joke, I don't sing, I don't dance, I don't like people who do. I've always kind of subscribed to that. We also have the podcast version of Behind the Headlines, the TV show we do every week with the folks at WKNO. All of the podcasts are wherever I just said they were. And on WYXR, if you're not a supporter of WYXR, consider becoming one. It's nonprofit, listener-supported radio. You can go to WYXR.org, or you can download the WYXR app. You can also get archives there of this show, all the other shows, music and talk that they do on WYXR. And if you're not a paid subscriber to the Daily Memphian, consider becoming one. Paid subscriptions pay for about half of what we do every year. The other, another 25% comes from advertising and sponsorships. And we are a nonprofit, 501c3, and a quarter of what we do, about $1.5 million every year, comes from philanthropy, donations, foundations, and gifts of all sizes. That's what supports a newsroom of about 40 people, and the biggest newsroom in the region. Recently, we did a show with we had Olivia Wall from Live at the Garden on, talking about their summer lineup. We had Anna Mullins-Ellis from New Memphis talking about their programs. We had a great show with Karen Carrier from Beauty Shop, another roadside attraction, all that. It was great talking about everything she's done and is still doing. It's amazing. Behind the Headlines, we've got coming up soon Mikkel Lowry, the Democratic candidate for county mayor. We recently had the Republican candidate, John DeBerry, and we last week had the Democratic candidate for county sheriff, Anthony Buckner. and more election and redistricting and all those kinds of shows coming up on Behind the Headlines every week. But we are still here with John Zeanah. Talk about, what have you learned from the Memphis 3.0 process that, I haven't read the book, so, full disclosure, but what do you, that is an evolving thing. There's some people very happy with it. It's guiding development. There's some people who don't like certain parts of it. Like what is, and again, 2016, that's a decade ago, right? I mean, and that 3.0 is definitely not on the shelf, right? I mean, it may not be implemented fully or whatever, but do you look back and say, we could have done this or that differently, or we should have done more of this and less of that, or is that part of the process that this would be an evolving thing that was not static?
Yeah, that's we look back on it every day. That's the point. You're absolutely right. It's meant to be evolving. It's meant to be continuous. It's set creating and adopting the plan set a foundation for a much longer range effort that isn't, something that we look up one day and 20 years from now, our city looks differently.
Right.
It's a foundation that sets the course for day-to-day implementation that happens in a variety of different ways by multiple different stakeholders that looks differently in different places. And that's all of those things are primarily the lessons that from the comprehensive plan from Memphis 3.0 that I bring into the book. So, I talk about other comprehensive plans from other cities in the book a little bit. The book itself is not about Memphis 3.0, but what I say is Memphis 3.0 is not the protagonist, but it's a recurring character in the book because a lot of the lessons of that came from the process of putting it together, from understanding how a plan is going to be implemented during the process of putting it together, who is implementing the plan, getting those different stakeholders aligned, and thinking about how their work is influenced by a comprehensive plan, how each of these stakeholders use it on a day-to-day basis. Forward-looking, that was a big part of what we did through the process of putting the document together. But then, since it's been adopted, sort of the ongoing work of evaluating how it's working, where it's not working, what are the means in which we make adjustments. All of that is part of the continuous practice of comprehensive planning that many comprehensive plans miss. Many comprehensive plans are designed to be completed once the plan is adopted. It may set up a roadmap or a matrix of how it gets implemented, but it doesn't. Those plans usually don't have a framework for ensuring the plan's implementation that is not only part of the document, but the process that follows. So one of the things that I talk about in the book is planners often treat the comprehensive plan as the most important part of the process. It's really just the beginning. The most important part are the intervals between those formal planning moments when we're actually using the plan, evaluating how well it's being used, adjusting, and then reorienting the plan so that ultimately how it's being put on the ground is aligned with the vision and the strategy that went into the plan in the first place.
So I probably should have done this more at the beginning, but that's fine. Of like examples of planning, and let me do it in my layman's terms, and you tell me. Like, so we're here, the Daily Memphis office out at Clark Tower, and it's a nice office. And it's kind of the middle of the city and the suburbs and all that. So it's the right place for us to be. In that sense, but and there's lots of great things around here. There's the Whole Foods is nice. The City Silo is a great coffee and food and so on. Walking from Clark Tower to City Silo, you risk your life. I mean, you're really like, I'll do it with my headphones on. I'm like, I should not have my headphones on. Like, anything could happen just from a traffic point of view, not anything else, because there is no path or sidewalk or marked thing that guides you from Clark Tower to City Silo, right? That on a probably maybe small level, that's really poor planning. Great, City Silo is great, Clark Tower is great, the Whole Foods in between, great. No connection between them, right? That's right. That's an example? You don't have to name that because you're, you work for the city and stuff. I'm going to say that that's an example of really poor planning. That these various things aren't made to work together. You see it in Texas cities where you're kind of in a neighborhood and you sort of turn a corner and there's a skyscraper, because Houston, I think, is like famously you can do anything. They may have rolled that back somewhat. So you get these really weird, you go from a neighborhood to a skyscraper to a factory way too fast in a city. That's poor planning, right? Conceptually.
Well, Houston famously doesn't have zoning. So
they famously don't have zoning, right? So you can kind of sort of do quote unquote anything. So,
right.
Those are my kind of layman's examples of poor planning, connections, roads, where their highways are and aren't, and that kind of stuff. Examples of Memphis 3.0 that you point to and say, these things happened in Memphis in the last 10 years, not solely because of Memphis 3.0, but as an extension or within that framework. So we should be practical about that for a second.
Yeah, sure. Well, okay, a couple of things. So the example that you gave is a good sort of on-the-ground example of how a plan translates into how buildings get laid out, and that sort of thing. So there's certainly the element of that. There's a couple of things I want to say about that. So before we had a comprehensive plan, a lot of planning takes place through the sort of transactions of individual developments and investments that ultimately have to come forward for review in one way or the other. We deliberately did not begin the process of rewriting the zoning code to match the comprehensive plan, coming right out of adoption, because we felt like there was probably a little bit of time needed to for the community to understand the plan, its use, its value. But one of the things that we did was say, for any application that's coming into the Land Use Control Board, for example, there has to be a review of how it's consistent with the comprehensive plan. And so there are examples of projects that either came in new and elements of those projects were changed as a result of recommendations that were in the comprehensive plan about things like connectivity within the site for pedestrian access, for example. Right. There are also projects that came through that did not get approved, and one of the primary factors maybe driving that was inconsistency with the comprehensive plan. And for the listeners who have paid attention to a lot of the work that's gone through Land Use Control Board or the City Council, you hear at times decision makers invoking, this is not aligned with our comprehensive plan, so we don't need to do this, or this type of project fits with the strategy of the central strategy of Memphis 3.0 is to sort of focus on anchors. We've spread our city out so much. Right. We only have so many resources. We're fairly stagnant or declining in population. We need to be focused on creating some critical mass and then build around those anchors. So you hear a lot of decision makers talking about that general strategy. And I think we see this probably most pronounced in a place like downtown where downtown is a very critical anchor. And I think most people recognize that we need to concentrate as much activity in downtown and then support it around downtown with smaller scale infill. But there are also sort of site-by-site projects like, I think about the proposal at Central and Cooper where, today it's, there was a plumbing store and a couple of
shop,
a couple of commercials
park there.
That's
and
right.
All that. Yeah,
that's right. And then you had an applicant come in. It's now a Chance Carlisle project, but the original applicant came in. They looked at it, creating essentially the anchor that was identified in the comprehensive plan to create more of a walkable center at that location that emphasized the ideas behind the plan. And of course, even Chance Carlisle's project, as he's taken it on, it still includes multifamily. It still includes a hotel. It still includes some limited commercial. So, that types of ideas have translated in sort of the big picture as well as on the ground in many ways.
We're probably going to have Buckman because I could talk about this stuff forever, but and we've got like 4 minutes left here, 3 minutes left. You mentioned population decline. We could do a whole show on this. Memphis is not unique in population stagnation. I mean, there are lots of cities that have gone through this because we beat ourselves up because Nashville's been growing or because Charlotte there's lots of growing cities, but there are other cities that have stagnated, right?
Sure.
Do you look is the answer to population stagnation only growth? Or are there cities or communities out there that you look at and say, they've handled it pretty well? They've actually adapted well. They've changed things pretty well. Or is it just an endemic problem? If you have that stagnation, you're kind of screwed.
I don't think you're screwed. There's certainly a lot of examples where cities have to invest in themselves. They have to invest in places where people want to be. The more we focus on creating those types of places and experiences, we create more opportunities, not just for new population to come in, but to keep our population here. And so a lot of the things that we've talked about out of the city recently is we've got to do a better job investing in new housing stock in our community. So the mayor's set a goal for 10,000 homes by 2030. That's not the city doing all that. That's market work too.
Right.
But ultimately, we've got to have a focus on creating more housing because it's not just we have to think about not just population, but population dynamics, household dynamics, how that translates to housing and creating places that people want. Because even though we've lost population, we've actually gained households because our average household size is declining.
That's a great point.
Everyone's household size is declining. So there's more. So from 1970 to today, we need like 35% more housing for 8,000 fewer people, right? Because household size has dropped so much.
Yeah.
From 2025 to 2030, based on the anticipated decline in average household size, we're going to need 25,000 new housing units for the same population. Yeah. But because household size is getting smaller, that also means that what people want out of a dwelling unit, out of a house, is a little bit different too. Nearly 40% of households in Memphis are one person. Yeah. So, but we've,
with an aging population, that's right. by definition is going to happen even more as well.
But 2/3 of our housing stock is single-family detached houses. So there's a mismatch in terms of the types of housing that we have and how our population and housing dynamics are changing. And so, it's really about making sure that we're creating options in our community so that not only we're attracting people, but people can stay in our community too, which is where a lot of the decline comes from.
Yeah. We're out of time. What was your first concert? I asked you this, but last time you were on the show, and I've forgotten.
I don't know. It was probably, I think I said Pearl Jam. I think that's right.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Good. No, that's good. Here in Memphis?
No. I'm from Alabama. So,
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So down Birmingham.
Yeah, it probably would have been Pensacola.
Pensacola. Yeah. Oh, good.
I grew
Pearl
up
Jam in Pensacola.
Yeah, I grew up in Gulf Shores, Alabama.
Like acid wash jeans kind of situation, maybe? Maybe?
No.
It was
a whole scene.
Good answer. That's a good answer. John Zeanah, the book is Today's Comprehensive Plan, an Adaptive Approach. When I get my copy, I'll track you down and get you to sign it. So congratulations, truly, on the book. It's no small thing. But that is all the time we have this week. If you missed any of the episode, you can go to the Daily Memphian, WYXR, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts to get the full episode. But thanks very much, and we'll see you next week.